I'm a wildlife photographer. It's a career built on patience, stillness, and the ability to become just another silent, uninteresting part of the landscape. I've spent weeks at a time utterly alone in the vast remote corners of national forests. My only companions were the whispers of the wind and the patient clicking of my camera's shutter. And I've waited 14 hours in a cramped blind, motionless, just for a 3-second glimpse of a reclusive pine marten. That's how I thrive on that solitude and how I love the deep, profound quiet of the wild. I always thought it's where I feel most myself. At least it used to be. Now the silence is the most terrifying thing I know, because it's never truly silent. And the solitude is a lie, because I am never, ever truly alone. This all started about 3 months ago. I was on a long-term project in a massive, sparsely populated national forest. It's a primeval sort of place, full of ancient Douglas firs that tower like cathedral spires, their tops lost in perpetual mist. My goal was to capture a portfolio of the elusive Cascade Red Fox, a beautiful but notoriously shy creature. For the first few weeks, it was business as usual. I'd rise before dawn, hike miles into the back country, and set up, waiting for the forest to offer up its secrets. One evening, I got the shot I'd been dreaming of, a magnificent male fox. The color of its coat was of a dying fire, paused in a sun-dappled clearing, its head cocked, listening. The light was perfect, the composition was something else. I rattled off a dozen frames, my heart soaring with that pure electric thrill that only photographers know. Back at my base camp that night, I eagerly loaded the photos onto my laptop. I scrolled through, and there it was, the money shot. The fox was perfectly in focus, its eyes were sharp and intelligent. The background was a beautiful, soft green and gold, and it was perfect. Except for the smudge. In the upper right-hand corner of the frame, there was a strange vertical blur of white light. It was out of focus, just an artifact, but it was annoying. It looked like a lens flare, but the sun was behind me. It made no sense. I checked the other frames, and it was there, in the exact same spot, in every single one of them. A persistent ghostly slash against the otherwise perfect image. I sighed, chalking it up to some weird internal reflection in my lens, and made a mental note to clean all my gear thoroughly. A week later, I was photographing a herd of elk by a river at dawn. Again, a perfect morning. The mist was rising off the water. The great animals were silhouetted against the nascent light. It was a primordial, beautiful scene, and I took hundreds of photos. And when I reviewed them later, the smudge was there again. But this time it was in a different location, a different time of day, and a completely different lens. But the same, vertical, out-of-focus slash of white light was in the upper periphery of the frame. Now I was more than annoyed. I was obsessed. I thought to myself that it was a consistent technical problem, something I needed to solve. Was it a scratch on my camera's sensor? A flaw in the shutter mechanism? I spent 2 full days troubleshooting, running diagnostics, taking shots of blank surfaces. I found nothing. My gear was, by all accounts, in perfect working order. The only way to solve it was to recreate the conditions. I went back to the clearing where I photographed the fox. I set up my camera on a tripod in the exact same spot, at the exact same time of day. I framed the shot identically, and then I waited. My goal was to see the flare appear through the viewfinder before I took the picture. I sat there for hours, still as a stone, my eyes pressed to the camera. The sun dappled the clearing. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The forest was quiet, but as the afternoon wore on, a new feeling began to creep in. A low-grade primal hum of anxiety. It was the feeling of being watched. It's a sensation every creature in the wild knows. A prickling at the back of your neck. A sudden, cold awareness that you are no longer just an observer, but you are also the observed. I slowly, carefully scanned the tree line, my eyes searching for the glint of an eye, the twitch of an ear. But I saw nothing. But the feeling grew stronger. It was coming from my side, from the very edge of my vision. I kept my head perfectly still, my breathing slow and even, but my eyes darted to the right. And I saw it, for a fraction of a second. It was a tall, wavering shape, like a column of heat haze. It was the shape of a man, long and thin, and it was hanging upside down from a thick, high branch of a fir tree, its form indistinct and shimmering. The moment my brain registered the impossible image, I snapped my head to look directly at it. And there was nothing there. Just the tree branch against empty sky. The forest was still. The feeling of being watched was gone. I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mouth dry. I told myself I was just tired and that the solitude was getting to me. I was just seeing things. It was a trick of the light, a figment of a sleep-deprived imagination. I packed up my gear, unnerved, and hiked back to my truck. I needed a break. I needed to see other people. I drove to the nearest ranger station, a rustic little cabin that served as the park's administrative hub. There were 2 rangers on duty, an older grizzled man with a kind, weary face and a younger woman. I made some small talk and bought a new map I didn't need, and then, trying to sound casual, I asked my question. "Hey, this is going to sound weird," I started, "but have you guys ever seen strange things out deep in the woods, like tricks of the light?" The older ranger looked up from his paperwork. He and the younger ranger exchanged a look. It was a brief, knowing glance, but it was enough. "What kind of tricks of the light are we talking about?" he asked, his voice a low, calm rumble. I felt like an idiot, but I pressed on. "Like a shape, a tail-shimmering shape, of a man hanging upside down from a tree. You only see it out of the corner of your eye." The younger ranger's friendly expression tightened. The older just sighed a long, tired sound and leaned back into his chair. "The upside-down man," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Yeah, we've all seen him. Most of the folks who spend enough time out here have." A wave of cold relief immediately followed by a wave of colder dread. I wasn't crazy, but that meant that thing was real. What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't know," he said, shaking his head. "Don't want to know. It's just a feature of the landscape, I guess. A weird local phenomenon, like a magnetic anomaly, or a patch of strange fog." "But what does it do?" "Nothing," he said, leaning forward and fixing me with a serious paternal gaze. "It does absolutely nothing as long as you do nothing too. That's the one and only rule, son. You see him in the corner of your eye, you keep looking straight. When you feel him watching you, you pretend you don't. You don't acknowledge him, you don't engage with him, and you sure as hell don't go looking for him. He's a thing you're only supposed to see by accident. You start making it on purpose, and that's when you get into trouble." "Trouble?" I asked. "What kind of trouble?"
"We don't know,"
the younger ranger chimed in.
"No one's ever been stupid enough to find out. It's just common knowledge. Professional courtesy among those of us who work out here. You leave him alone, and he leaves you alone."
Her voice tense. I left the ranger station with my mind reeling. Their warning was stark and absolute, but they had also given me something else. A validation, and a name. The upside-down man, and the smudge in my photos. It was a vertical shape of light. A shape of a man, hanging, and it was him. My camera could see him even when I couldn't. And that's when I made my mistake. My fatal, arrogant mistake. I'm a photographer. My entire life, my entire purpose is to see things, and to capture them. To be told that there was something out there, a real observable phenomenon, that I was supposed to ignore. I just couldn't do that. It was an irresistible challenge, and the ranger's warning was just a dare. I went back into the woods, but this time I was hunting for him. My entire methodology changed. I'd find a spot and wait. Not for an animal to appear, but for that familiar prickling sensation on my skin. The moment I felt it, I wouldn't move my head, I'd keep my eyes locked forward, but I'd raise my camera, aiming the lens not at what I was looking at, but at the periphery, at the space where I felt he was, and I'd shoot. The first photos were chilling. The vertical smudge just grew. It was a brilliant, searing slash of overexposed white light, sharp and defined. It looked like a wound in the fabric of the photograph, a tear through which a sterile, featureless light was pouring. And with every photo I took, the slash grew wider, brighter, and more aggressive. It was like I was annoying it, and it was screaming back at me through my own camera. I became possessed by it. I stopped eating properly. I barely slept. I was fueled by a manic, obsessive energy. I filled memory card after memory card with these impossible images. The creature was always there, just at the edge of my sight, a shimmering, wavering promise. And I kept shooting, trying to get a clearer image, trying to resolve that blinding white light into a discernible form. I was in a deep, mossy canyon. The feeling of being watched was palpable. I raised my camera, aimed it into the periphery, and pressed the shutter. The resulting image on the small LCD screen was pure, blinding white light. A completely blank frame. I tried again. White. I even aimed it at my own feet. And again, it was all white. He had broken it. Or more accurately, he had filled it. My camera could now only see the blinding, featureless light of his presence. It was useless. Any sane person would have stopped then. They would have taken the ranger's warnings to heart and gotten the hell out of there. But I wasn't sane anymore. My obsession had burned through my reason. The loss of my camera just felt like a challenge. And now I would have to use my own eyes. I continued the hunt. I would walk through the woods until I felt the familiar presence. Then I would stop and I would try to see him. I kept my head pointed forward, but I'd strained my eyes to the side, trying to resolve the shimmering, waving shape in my peripheral vision. I tried to hold it, focus on it, force it into clarity. And that's when the smudge moved from my photos to my own vision. It started as a small, barely noticeable floater in the corner of my right eye. A tiny, translucent blur. I assumed it was an eye strain, but it didn't go away. And every time I went on one of my hunts, every time I tried to force my eyes to see the creature directly, the smudge would get a little bit bigger, a little more opaque. It was turning from a translucent blur into a patch of milky white fog. I was in the woods trying to focus on the shimmering shape hanging from a distant branch, and as I strained, I saw the white fog in my own eye physically expand, spreading like a drop of milk in water. With a clarity so profound and so terrifying, it felt like a physical blow. I finally understood what was happening. It was that he couldn't be seen directly. His very nature was to exist at the edge of perception, and by trying to force him into the center, by trying to capture him, first with my camera, and then with my own eyes, I was violating the fundamental rule of his existence, and he was fighting back. He was erasing the very part of my vision that I was using to see him. He was a blind spot, a living, predatory blind spot, and he was growing and feeding on my own sight. The panic that hit me was like anything I had ever known. It was the terror of a man realizing the weapon he has been firing is powered by his own blood. I was deep in a remote wilderness and I was going blind. I ran. It was a clumsy, stumbling, panicked flight. I tripped over roots I couldn't see properly, crashing through branches that seemed to come out of nowhere. The white fog in the corner of my eye seemed to pulse and swirl with every frantic beat of my heart. I finally made it back to my truck, my body bruised and scratched, my mind a screaming wreck. I drove out of the forest and I have not been back. That was a month ago. The white patch in my vision hasn't gone away. I've seen 3 different ophthalmologists and even a neurologist. They've run every test imaginable. My eyes, they tell me, are perfectly healthy. There is absolutely nothing physically wrong with them. They think I'm having a complex psychological episode brought on by stress and solitude. I knew it wouldn't be that easy. I thought the connection was through the photos. I thought that they were the anchor. So last week I built a bonfire in my backyard. I took every memory card and every hard drive, every single print I had made of the white slashes, and I burned them. I watched until they were nothing but a pile of melted plastic and gray ash. I felt a sense of relief, an exorcism if I may say. But it didn't work. He's not just in the forest anymore. He followed me home. And he's here with me now as I type this. Not in the room and not in the house, but in the corner of my eye. I'll be sitting here on my couch and I'll get that old familiar prickling sensation. And I'll know, if I let my focus soften, I can see him. A tail wavering upside down, shimmering at the very edge of my vision. Sometimes he's in the corner of the room, and sometimes when I'm outside, he's hanging from a telephone pole. But he's always there. A silent, constant companion. The Rangers were right. The only rule is to ignore him, and now, that is my life. I live in a constant state of vigilant denial. I can never turn my head too quickly, and I can never let my eyes wander. I have to consciously, actively not see the thing that is always there. Because I know that if I try to look at him, if I give in to that primal urge to face the thing that is watching me, the white fog in my eye will grow, and there's not much of my vision left to lose. So this is my warning. If you ever find yourself in the deep quiet places of the world, and you feel a prickling at the back of your neck, and you see something impossible just at the edge of your sight, for the love of God, pretend you didn't. Look away. Keep looking straight ahead. Some things aren't meant to be seen, and they will take everything from you to make sure you can't. It's no secret that, when in need of money, someone is willing to go to extreme lengths. I'm not morally corrupt enough to murder, but I was still desperate to do things close to it. The divorce had been hard on me, and I wanted to get out of that house and just live on my own. For that you need money, and sadly my job wasn't paying enough. And I couldn't just go off and wander and change my address so quickly. In retrospect, maybe it wasn't so wise to look for a job on the dark web. They pay the most though, and I didn't want to spend my time caring for some kid or an old lady, only to get paid $10 an hour. I started browsing whatever forum I could find, and filtered my search so that I wouldn't have to kill anyone or sleep with anyone. After a while, I came across offerings of package deliveries and such things. Deliver this to this address, show up to this house, etc., etc. It was alright by me, but I didn't have a car at the time, and I couldn't just walk for miles with suspicious boxes in hand. I finally came across this listing. Museum worker needed, $100 an hour. Temporary exhibition hosted somewhere in the suburbs. I checked the address on Google Maps and found some abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. I'd driven by it a few times, back when the family car was also my car. I thought I could give it a try. Maybe it was some contemporary art stuff, some voodoo statues, or even cursed items. I didn't believe in any of that, so it really wasn't a problem to me. It said I had to be there during the week from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sundays were off. The exhibition would run for about 3 months. I quickly added up some numbers. $100 an hour for 6 hours a day, for 6 days a week, for 3 months. That would certainly cover for a deposit and some second-hand car. That would be enough to help me get by at least, I figured. I ran through the possibilities of weird implications this ad might have. Maybe the museum was a front for human trafficking, drug dealing, or other illegal activities. I didn't even know why I said maybe. That was surely the case. I just had to be careful and not look too deep into things. Or maybe the exhibition was hosted by some eccentric millionaire who wanted to display his dubious antiques. Either way, $100 is $100. I replied and got an instant response. Next thing I know, I was hired. With the little money that I had, I bought a bike and some headphones to help pass the time. I arrived to the warehouse one Monday at 10 a.m., eager to get the job started and get my money. I wasn't expecting it to be so empty. The warehouse was huge on the inside, but the items displayed were very few. Mostly paintings covering the walls and some wooden statues, all extremely tall. They almost reached the ceiling of the warehouse, and I couldn't really see their faces. All of them were sort of bent down, almost as if they were giants, watching so as not to step on us. Some notebooks were on display too. Most of them had drawings or scribbles. They weren't exactly extraordinary, and I really couldn't tell what I was looking at. I saw some unknown surgical equipment. It looked almost medieval. Next to it, a pair of ordinary scissors. I thought at first that it was ironic, or just a piece of art. But the washed-out lady that led me in there told me that these particular scissors were authentic and extremely important. I couldn't really tell what age the lady was. Her skin was clear and luminous. Based solely off that, I could have guessed she was in her early teens. But her eyes moved around a lot and had a certain darkness that you only gain with age. Contrasting to her face, her hands were wrinkled and stained. Her hair fell in long threads on her back and was tangled towards the end. It almost looked unwashed. The most interesting part consisted in the last 3 items, displayed on the opposing wall to the entrance. If I sat at my desk near the entrance, the wall was almost invisible, hidden in shadows. I didn't understand why the lights were so dim. The lady explained that it contributed to the atmosphere of the exhibition. One of the items was a low, round wooden table. The plaque in front of it read, "The Hunger." The table was chewed and clawed at the edges. I think it used to be a square, but the wood had been bitten off and chewed to the point where the corners were rounded. The teeth marks on the table were definitely human. I figured it must have been some sort of art piece. The other was a pair of shoes. The plaque read, "The Shoes That Walked Home." They were old and made of leather, and worn out in impossible places, as if who had ever worn them had walked in circles continuously. The last item was an empty pedestal. Its plaque read, "Painter, do not look when occupied." I stared at it a while. "Such an interesting concept," I mumbled, noticing the lady's unblinking gaze on me.
Yes.
She replied.
Don't look when it's occupied, though.
How would I know?
You'll see. It's a really easy job. You don't have a lot of duties, and you earn so much money by basically doing nothing. You must understand, we value your discretion and lack of curiosity the most.
Yes, thanks, I responded quickly. Suddenly, I realized I didn't really want her to leave. That didn't stop her from traversing the warehouse and shutting the door behind her, without any other formalities. I was left alone with the, art, and my job was to sit at the desk and greet visitors, sell them tickets. I noticed that the stack of tickets was relatively small. It's almost as if they didn't really expect visitors. As I imagined, the warehouse was at the edge of town and nothing really promoted this exhibition. No one was going to come. I decided I would put on some music and study the paintings. I got up and moved in front of the first, titled My Mother. It showed a beautiful sea landscape, the crystal waves melting into the bright shore. It was the type of scenery you'd find before a storm, so bright and yet so ominous, as if it knew what it awaited. I couldn't find any trace of a woman, though. Right when I was about to move to the next painting, my neck tensed up. It's impossible to describe it. The sudden alarming urge to run. The panic that builds up in your chest. I was afraid to turn around, and yet I hated having my back turned to the room. I took a deep breath. I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. I didn't turn around. I kept locking eyes with my mother, afraid to act on the impulse of running back to my desk. After torturous moments where my heart was threatening to jump out of my chest, I did a swift turn and then plunged back to my desk. Phew, I said out loud. This place is creepy as fuck. Why? Because, I don't know, it's just fucking odd. I wouldn't pay money to come here. My throat was dry, it was itching, in the cold air drops of sweat began gathering on my forehead. My eyes darted to various points of the room, to the paintings, to the statues, to its corners. Who had I just spoken to? Who even was that? I stared at the closed entrance door. Who is that? I got no answer. Fuck off, just answer me. I heard you loud and clear. I know that someone is in here. You have to. I began hopelessly. You have to buy a ticket to get in. I heard a clatter in the back of the warehouse. The hunger. The shoes that walked home. The painter. Did the pedestal refer to the one who made the paintings? I stood up and made my way slowly to the back. I kept looking at the floor until I saw the edges of the hunger. In the dim light, I could make out the shadow of the pedestal. And on it, I saw the shadow of a figure. It looked vaguely humanoid, like someone crouched over. I couldn't tell which direction it was facing. I was so cold I stepped back, slowly, the same way I came in. At last, after what felt like billions of years, I sat down on my chair. I spent the remaining time of my shift there, too disturbed to listen to music. At some point, I heard the faint sound of wet footsteps coming from the back. You know when you're little and you begin recognizing the walk of your family members as they're coming up the stairs? How can you distinguish between your younger brother's upbeat walk and your father's slow, heavy steps? These footsteps sounded as if those two patterns were combined, almost like limping. They went on for a few seconds, then faded without reaching a certain destination. I swore to myself that I would quit the next day. However, when I saw the bank transfer that night, I thought it wasn't really a bad job. It's not like I was being chased around or hurt in any way. I just had to sit down. I dreamt, however, of those footsteps reaching me at last. It's Tuesday, and as I'm writing this, I can hear them faintly in the back again. I just hope that they appreciate my discretion. And I wonder if the hunger and the shoes that walked home are connected in some way. But then again, they don't pay me to be curious. This is something I should really be speaking about with a therapist, I know. I would, or I have been, but that's not really an option anymore. In fact, I couldn't tell you how many times I've told this story to various medical professionals. I'm 30 now, and it's been 20 years since it happened, and I just wanted to stop. I was a pretty average kid, I think at least. A little weird, but every kid is a little weird. I had an older sister and we fought like two cats. I had a couple good friends, most of whom lived on my street or one street over, and we would meet after school and play until it was time for dinner. My life was fairly ideal. I played soccer, I think. Honestly, I have a lot of trouble remembering much of my childhood. But I do remember that I got a Nintendo DS for my 10th birthday, and we had a big party in the backyard. Practically the whole neighborhood showed up. My birthday was just before school got out for the summer, so the air buzzed with excitement and the evening was warm, and felt more alive than other nights. The grown-ups started a fire in our little fire pit, and they sat around it and drank beer while we ran around. I was allowed to stay up past when I usually went to bed, and the other kids chased fireflies with me and roasted marshmallows until late into the night. I remember going to bed happy, excited for the upcoming summer, and exhausted. I fell asleep quickly. Waking up the day after my birthday, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I hadn't had a nightmare. It wasn't that. I had slept better than I could really ever remember sleeping before. It was late, I realized. That must be it. My mom usually woke me up around 8 if it wasn't a school day. She said it was a good habit to be in the routine of waking up early and starting your day on the right foot. With the light streaming in from my windows and the slightly muggy heat in the room, I figured it was already 10 a.m. or even later. I smiled, sliding out of bed. It must have been one final birthday treat, letting me sleep in. She had let me sleep in the day before too, of course, although on my birthday itself I had wanted to get up as early as possible. "Mom?" I called out into the hallway, poking my head out the door. No answer. I frowned. It was Saturday, so my dad was definitely already at work, but my mom shouldn't be. My sister wouldn't be home either. She had left the night before to spend the night at a friend's house. She was 13 now and allowed to have sleepovers, for which I was internally jealous. I decided she must be out in front of the garden, so I put on a shirt and left my room. I smelled coffee, but there was none left in the pot. There were dishes in the sink too, with remnants of eggs stuck to a pan. It wasn't necessarily alarming, but it was a bit strange. Even on days I slept in, there was always breakfast left over for me. I opened the front door, opening my mouth to call out to my mom, but I instantly froze. Halfway up our walkway was the mailman, and he was on the ground, sprawled out awkwardly on the cement, fresh blood pooled beneath him in a gruesome splatter. I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't move. His limbs were bent at horrible angles, his face pointed away from me. It almost looked like some omnipotent force had lifted him into the air and slammed him back down. The package he must have been delivering laid a few feet away, the cardboard dented and soaked in red. I didn't need any confirmation he was dead. It really wasn't a question. I had never seen a dead person before that, and sometimes my parents had watched horror movies, but that hardly counted. I backed into the house and closed the door behind me. My mind was racing too fast, and my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. Everything in my body was reeling, so much so that all I could do was move slowly in a faux sense of calm. "Mom?" I called out again into the house, my voice breaking. "Mom? Are you home? Something happened outside." No one answered. The house felt way too quiet. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I had to brace myself against the wall as I made my way to my parents' room, because I was almost shaking too hard to hold myself up. "Mom?" I pushed open her bedroom door. It creaked, the sound almost deafening against the silence that blanketed the room. Our old gray cat, Gumbo, weaseled her way through the crack and slipped out into the hallway, brushing against my leg on her way. I saw a lump in the bed. For a moment I thought it was just pillows, but then I realized it couldn't have been. The bed was made and the pillows were all accounted for. "Mom, are you asleep?" It came out as a whisper, even though it wasn't like I wasn't trying to wake her up. I wanted her awake. Badly. I think I just somehow already knew. Something was hanging in the air. This heaviness, like the whole world had been blanketed in a thing that was empty, hot, and dead. The desert popped into my head. A place that was so far away from everything and completely devoid of any life. When I pulled back the covers, the shock washed over me like an electric zap. Every one of my veins and bones and muscles felt 20 degrees hotter than they should have been. There was blood everywhere. I could barely see any section of the sheets that wasn't soaked in it. It looked like the cherry juice we sometimes made from the tree in our backyard, squashing the berries with our hands and laughing as the sticky syrup trickled down our wrists. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was open wide too, like she was about to scream. I gagged, stumbling backwards, almost falling down. My legs felt like they wouldn't work anymore. I was in a daze as I stumbled back to the kitchen. The eggs on the pan seemed like they were mocking me now. I knew my parents had told me what to do in an emergency, but all of that was gone from me now. This didn't feel like an emergency. It felt more like a horrible nightmare. I pinched myself on the arm just in case. The neighbors, that was it. I was supposed to call my neighbors. The number was on a sticky note next to the phone. My fingers shook as I dialed the number. They picked up after 3 rings that felt like they took 1 year each. I heard a sort of crackling sound like someone was moving the phone around.
Hello?
Hi. I cleared my throat, trying to get rid of the lump firmly lodged at the back of my tongue. "This is, Jackson from next door." I heard some sort of giggle, a choked one, like they were trying to hold it back, and then some hushed whispering.
Hi, Jackson.
The voice said. I assumed it was the mother, Mrs. Winston.
Is everything all right? Can I help you with something?
Something happened. My mom.
Oh, honey.
Mrs. Winston said, her tone gentle, but something about it felt deeply off. My stomach twisted.
Why don't you head on over here? We'll figure out what's going on together.
Okay. I remember hanging up before she said anything else. Something about her voice was very unnerving to me. Still, I didn't know where else to go. I slipped out the back door so I wouldn't have to walk past the mailman, Gumbo watching me go. I knocked on the neighbor's door, and there was no answer. I knocked again, and still nothing. I stepped into the flower beds and peered into the windows. Someone was lying on the couch, their head tilted back like they were staring up at the ceiling. For a moment, that was what I thought was happening, until I saw that their chest was open like a patient on a surgery table. All guts and organs and blood. So much blood. It was Mr. Winston in his sweater vest and brown dad shorts. Dead like the mailman. Dead like my mom. Something came over me and I burst through their front door. It was unlocked, which I hadn't really expected, so I went tumbling into the room. Landing on my stomach, my face slammed into the floor. Face to face with Mrs. Winston, who lay dead in front of the phone. Her eyes were wide open, too. There was a fly on one of them, crawling all over, pausing every few seconds to rub its hands together. I had started to cry. It was finally hitting me that this was real and not some dream. I desperately wanted my mom. I scrambled to my feet, nearly throwing up when I realized my face was covered in her blood. I swiped at it with my hands, trying to wipe it away as quickly as possible. Then, instinctively, I licked my lips. Horrified, I braced myself for the coppery taste of the blood on my tongue. But it never came. It was sweet. I hesitated, trembling incessantly, before cautiously raising one of my red fingers to my lips. Sweet. Memories flooded my mind. Memories of baking with my grandmother. The sweet syrup we would sometimes pour into the mixing bowls. It was fucking corn syrup. I ran to my father's work, which was on the other side of town. By the time I got there, I was close to passing out and drenched in sweat. But it had made it a little easier to get here with the road completely devoid of cars. There was some parked on the side of the road, or every now and then in the middle of it, but none of them had people in it. Some of them had blood, thick and red and gooey. The nice receptionist that was always at the desk and always gave me candy when my dad brought me in had her head against the computer. Her hair was matted with red liquid, as if someone had ripped out entire chunks of her scalp. Before I could think too hard about it, I wiped my finger across the side of her head and licked it. It was sweet too. I felt like my brain was going to break, like I was standing on the edge of something completely incomprehensible, and I shook the woman. She flopped like a rag doll. I sobbed, shoving her, and she slumped to the ground, her head knocking against the tiles. "Wake up!" I screamed. "I know you're not dead!" She didn't move an inch, just stared, unblinking, her mouth hanging half open. I ran into the room my dad usually worked in, scanning it for his workspace. I couldn't remember where it was, just that it was around halfway back and close to the wall. In every cubicle, someone was dead. Sometimes they looked halfway peaceful, as if they had been caught by surprise, but most of them were eviscerated in one way or another. Entrails hanging out, bones showing, blood sprayed against the walls, even some with faces ripped clean off. It was like something unseeable had swept through the town on a rampage, but all their blood was made of corn syrup. In a brave moment, I even touched one of the organs. Something that looked like a strange deflated balloon, and it jiggled, but more like plastic than a human body part. At one point I swore I heard a giggle behind me. I whipped around, but no one was there. I found my dad at the water cooler, sitting against the wall, cone paper cups still gripped loosely in his hand. He stared straight ahead, blood leaking from his eyes, nose, and mouth. "Dad?" I whispered, grabbing his shoulder. This isn't funny. Please stop." There was a strange look on his face that I could barely make out through the red. Almost like a smile someone would only make if they were trying very hard not to. I walked back home down the middle of the road, balancing on the yellow lines to have something to focus on, because I was fairly certain if I stopped walking I wouldn't start again. When I got there, I climbed into bed and closed my eyes. I really didn't know what else to do. Eventually, after what must have been hours and hours of lying there, I drifted off into a restless sleep. I woke up to someone shaking my shoulder. I screamed, scrambling away from them, immediately wide awake and terrified.
Whoa!
My mom backed away smiling.
Sorry, buddy. I didn't mean to scare you.
I was breathing hard. I looked her over, clutching my chest. She was completely fine. She looked it at least. She stood there in a white blouse and blue jeans, her hair tied up like always, her eyes bright and happy. What day is it? Her smile faded and she frowned a little. It was then that I noticed the smell of bacon wafting in from the kitchen.
It's Sunday, bud. Remember?
2 days after my birthday, so yesterday had been real. What happened yesterday? She placed the back of her hand on my forehead, tutting softly.
Did one of those neighborhood kids you play with get you sick, honey? Do you feel okay?
I dropped it because I didn't know what else to say. I convinced myself maybe I really was sick, and I was so relieved to see her. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I went to eat breakfast, and sitting at the table between my dad and my sister, everything was normal. But when I left the house later that day, I saw it. On the walkway leading up to our house, there was something pink on the pavement. A faint pink stain, like something sweet and red and sticky, had been recently scrubbed away. Like I said, it's been 30 years. I'd been feeling like I'd almost recovered from that incident. I'd asked everyone I knew countless times about the day, but none of them seemed to have any idea what I was talking about. But still, I'd almost let it go, as if it had never happened. Until today. Today, when I walked into my therapist's office, it seemed strangely quiet. There was usually music playing, something soothing and soft. But there were no people at the waiting room or at the front desk. There was no one. Just silence. I let myself into Dr. Sheldon's office, completely perplexed, which is when I found her dead on the carpet, her blood splayed across the walls, even dripping from the ceiling. It was crazy, I know that, but I immediately tasted it. Sweet. I rolled her over and her eyes were open, a strange smile on her face. This time I did something I didn't think to do as a kid. I checked her pulse. She's alive. I don't know what to do. I can't believe they're doing this to me again. Do they think this is funny?